Welcome to the deep dive. And wow, what a weekend. If you felt like the news from September 19th to the 21st, 2025 just completely overwhelmed you, well, you're definitely not alone.
Absolutely. It wasn't just one big story, was it? It felt like
Mm.
multiple fundamental shifts hitting all at once: global diplomacy, U.S. politics, even markets in health.
Exactly. So our mission today is to try and cut through some of that noise. We want to synthesize the really key moments and see, what the underlying connections might be. We're seeing sort of three big areas.
Hmm.
First, this major realignment in the West regarding the Middle East conflict. Second, just a whole mess of policy crises inside the US budget, tech, culture wars.
Internal fragmentation.
Yeah. And third, some really surprising market moves happening right alongside critical global health warnings. It's a lot to unpack, but we're going to look at how these things might be interacting.
And what strikes me immediately is just the speed of change, especially in global institutions. I mean, the biggest example has to be that coordinated announcement on September 21st. Britain, Canada, Australia, Portugal, all recognizing a Palestinian state.
Let's just pause on that for a second because this is huge, isn't it? For the listener, you have to understand the history here. Western governments, especially the big U.S. allies, they've basically held back on recognition since 1948.
Right. The line was always that statehood had to come after a negotiated two-state deal.
Exactly. So this is a massive break from that decades-long stance.
It really is a huge strategic pivot. Now, okay, over 140 countries, mostly Global South, already recognize Palestine, but this move by four major Western democracies together, that signals a serious, maybe even permanent crack in that old diplomatic consensus.
And the driver seems pretty clear.
Oh, absolutely. It's the fallout from the Gaza war post-October 7th, 2023.
Yeah.
The sheer scale of the humanitarian crisis, the civilian deaths that has just profoundly changed public opinion, and now policy in places like London, Ottawa.
And the reaction from Israel tells you everything you need to know about how significant this was perceived. Prime Minister Netanyahu immediately called it a reward to terrorism.
And it wasn't just words. You had far-right ministers threatening immediate annexation in the West Bank, actual retaliation.
So the UK Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, framed it as reviving the two-state solution. But the immediate effect seems almost the opposite. Heightened tensions, maybe making that solution even harder.
That's the risk, yeah. It instantly escalated the rhetoric and the potential for unilateral actions. And, the split between the U.S. and its allies just got sharper right then.
How so?
Well, while these countries were recognizing Palestine, the U.S. was basically alone at the UN Security Council, vetoing a resolution for an immediate, unconditional, permanent ceasefire in Gaza.
Even though 14 other countries backed it.
Exactly. So you see America's closest allies coordinating on one path, while the U.S. is kind of isolated, prioritizing something different. That's serious fragmentation among partners right there.
And speaking of global friction and maybe challenges to U.S. positions, we saw a couple of other flashpoints pop up over just those 3 days. North Korea, for one.
Right. Kim Jong-un said talks with the U.S. are possible, but only if Washington drops the whole denuclearization fixation. He made it clear, again, his nukes are off the table.
The interesting part there is the framing, isn't it? He specifically mentioned good memories of dealing with the current U.S. president from a previous term. Trying to drive a wedge, maybe?
It certainly looks like political signaling. Like he thinks there's a way to ease pressure without actually giving up his weapons. It's a direct challenge to a core U.S. foreign policy goal.
And then, boom, a military escalation down in South America, Venezuela.
Yeah, that flared up fast. The U.S. military destroyed 2 Venezuelan boats. They said it was drug trafficking, killing at least 14 people.
And Venezuela's response was pretty forceful, mobilizing over 2,500 troops to La Guayaquil Island. That seems significant.
Very significant, especially for a country dealing with so many internal problems. It shows how quickly these things can escalate. You have these conflicting stories. The U.S. allies split on Palestine. It just reinforces that theme, Global coordination seems to be breaking down fast, replaced by these very fragmented, localized responses.
Okay, let's bring that lens back home because Washington felt just as fragmented, arguably, starting with the budget crisis. Again.
Oh, yeah, the classic Washington dysfunction. Friday, September 19th, the Senate couldn't even advance the House's short-term funding bill.
And then they just left for recess, with the deadline days away.
Yep. Raising the very real specter of another government shutdown right at the end of the fiscal year, September 30th. It's become almost routine, this brinkmanship.
And it wasn't just about numbers, was it? It was policy fights baked in.
Exactly. Democrats were saying, look, we need to protect healthcare subsidies that expire otherwise. Republicans saw it as leverage, trying to force concessions on other things. It's just
Okay.
political fragmentation risking real economic harm.
But, okay, amidst all that chaos, there was one area where maybe a coordinated solution was emerging. TikTok.
Right, that long-running saga. It looks like a framework is taking shape for a sort of U.S.-run TikTok entity.
What's the structure look like? Because it's not a simple sale, right?
No, not at all. The idea seems to be an American-dominated board. ByteDance, the Chinese parent company, would only get 1 seat out of 7.
Yeah.
And crucially, U.S. partners, probably Oracle, would oversee all the American user data on U.S. soil.
So if that actually happens, it avoids the ban for 170 million users.
Exactly. And it sets a massive precedent for how other foreign tech platforms might have to operate under U.S. oversight. It's like a hybrid solution born out of these intense national security debates.
But it wasn't all smooth sailing for tech. There was that H-1B announcement that just seemed to drop like a bomb.
Oh, yeah. The White House announced a new $100,000 annual application fee for H-1B visas.
Yeah.
$100,000 per application per year.
Wow. The reaction must have been immediate.
Catastrophic is probably the word. Industry groups instantly warned this would completely derail projects, especially in specialized tech fields, and just push more work overseas.
Did they walk that back at all?
They scrambled to clarify later that the fee wouldn't hit existing H-1B holders. But the signal was sent. It reflects this intense political pressure to favor domestic labor, even if it potentially hurts innovation or competitiveness. Another example of a kind of fragmented policy approach.
And that fragmentation really brings us to this collision course between media, culture, and government power. This seemed to explode over the weekend, especially following the assassination of Charlie Kirk.
It really did.
Yeah.
Multiple fronts opening up almost simultaneously. First, ABC suspended Jimmy Kimmel's show after comments he made. That came after reported threats from the FCC.
And the president himself weighed in.
Directly threatened to revoke broadcast licenses for networks airing negative coverage. That's incredibly direct executive pressure on the media, historically quite aggressive.
And then the Pentagon got involved too, with this pledge for journalists.
Yeah, this was really striking. The Pentagon started requiring journalists to sign a pledge not to publish certain sensitive but still unclassified information just to get access.
Wait, unclassified, so stuff the public technically could know, but reporters have to promise not to report.
Exactly. Critics immediately called it what it sounds like. Prior restraint. Basically, government censorship before publication. Requiring reporters to sign away their rights on unclassified info. That's a major expansion of government control over the flow of information and, well, it seems to run right up against First Amendment norms.
But we did see at least one pushback from the courts, right, regarding the National Endowment for the Arts.
Yes, thankfully. A federal judge blocked an administration order that was trying to penalize arts groups funded by the NEA based on what the order called gender ideology.
And the ruling was based on free speech.
Correct. The judge said imposing viewpoint-based restrictions on funding recipients violates the First Amendment. Basically, the government can't use the purse strings to enforce ideological conformity. That was a pretty important institutional check amidst all the other pressures.
Okay, so we've gone from global splits to budget fights to these intense culture and media battles. Let's pivot now to the economy and maybe system fragility. Because weirdly, amidst all this turmoil, the markets were up.
Yeah, oddly euphoric is a good word. The S&P 500, the Dow, they hit new all-time closing highs right around September 19th, 20th.
Why? What was the thinking there?
Markets were basically pricing in this perfect soft landing. Inflation easing, the Fed had recently cut rates. Pure optimism.
But that optimism happened right as this really stunning challenge to a core U.S. institution was playing out.
Exactly. While the markets cheered, President Trump was attempting to get Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook removed. And not through normal channels, through an emergency order at the Supreme Court.
Hold on. Trying to remove a sitting Fed governor through the Supreme Court, has that ever happened before?
Never. That's what makes it so alarming. First time in the Fed's 112-year history, a president has tried that. The whole point of the Fed is its independence from short-term political pressure, right, to keep the economy stable.
So this was a direct assault on that independence.
Absolutely. Using the Supreme Court like this. It raises massive questions about separation of powers, political control over the central bank, the very stability of economic governance, a huge challenge to institutional coordination.
Yet in the corporate world, we saw a different kind of coordination, almost counterintuitive. NVIDIA buying a huge stake in Intel.
Yeah, a $5 billion stake. NVIDIA, the AI chip leader, investing heavily in its main rival, Intel.
What's driving that?
Pure, raw demand for AI, it seems. The need for computing power is just so massive. Despite being rivals, this suggests maybe a forced cooperation is happening. They need supply chain diversity, maybe shared R&D, just to meet the global demand. It's this fascinating financial coordination happening even as political fragmentation is everywhere else.
Okay, let's shift to global health now. Another area where coordination is literally life or death. The amended International Health Regulations, the IHR, came into force.
Yes, on September 19th, this is the WHO's rule book for global pandemic response, basically. And the new amendments are a big deal.
What did they change?
They require countries to seriously beef up their disease surveillance and, crucially, commit to much faster, more transparent communication during outbreaks. It's a direct lesson learned, or trying to be learned, from the early failures of the COVID response. A big push for global coordination.
But almost immediately, reality kind of underscored why those rules are needed.
Exactly. The very next day, you had the CDC flagging a new Ebola outbreak in the DR Congo, and at the same time, the Pan American Health Organization was putting out new measles alerts because vaccination rates are falling across the Americas.
So disease threats are still very real and resurgent.
Definitely. And where vaccination drops, health systems get stressed immediately. But then, look what happened domestically in the U.S., complicating things again. The CDC's own vaccine panel voted to restrict access to the MMRV combo vaccine for kids under 4.
MMRV, that's measles, mumps, rubella, varicella.
Correct. A standard combination vaccine. But the federal panel recommended restricting it for the youngest kids.
And states immediately disagreed.
Almost instantly.
Hmm?
Key states, especially in the Northeast, New York, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, they announced they would not follow that guidance and would stick to broader access policies.
So you have the federal advisory body saying one thing and multiple states saying, nope, we're doing it differently.
Exactly. Public health policy fragmenting in real time. Normally, you need unified messaging for public health to work. But here you get states creating this patchwork quilt of rules. It causes confusion for parents, for doctors. It kind of undermines the very coordination the IHR is trying to build globally.
And just to cap off the weekend's theme of fragility, a couple of hits to basic infrastructure.
Yeah, a major cyber attack hit several large European airports on the 20th, causing big delays. And separately, a communications outage briefly messed up air traffic control near Dallas on the 19th.
Both happening so close together.
Just stark reminders, really, of how dependent we are on these complex digital networks and how vulnerable they still are, whether to attacks or just simple failures.
What an absolutely packed 72 hours. It's dizzying just recapping it. We went from arguably the biggest shift in Western Mideast policy in decades, straight to the U.S. government teetering on shutdown, an unprecedented challenge to the Fed's independence, all while chip rivals are making massive deals.
The connecting thread, I think, is really clear. It's this constant tension, this friction between forces pushing for coordination and forces driving fragmentation. You see these necessary, if sometimes awkward, moves toward global organization. The IHR updates recognizing Palestine multilaterally, even that NVIDIA-Intel deal driven by market necessity. But that's constantly fighting against this incredibly intense, volatile, and often successful fragmentation happening within nations. The budget fights, the states defying federal vaccine guidance, the political attack on the Fed.
So what's the takeaway for you listening to all this? It seems clear that these big, slow-moving international structures and rules are now slamming right into incredibly fast, volatile domestic politics.
Yeah.
So the final question we want to leave you with is this. When that collision happens, when volatile domestic politics meets these critical international frameworks, which force ultimately wins out? Which one really determines stability or instability in the direction things are heading? That's something to think about. That's your deep dive homework.